Back to our Elden Ring coverage. Now in this part we have two separate bosses down here in the Siofra River that we're going to be tackling. On top of that there is a rather difficult encounter that we reach by taking the elevator over here next to below the well. We're going to be discussing that and giving you an idea of how difficult it is. And then we're going to be making our way on over to the very first spot in Caelid, which is what we are finally going to start in the next part. But for now at least, head right on over to where we see these lit up columns, and we're going to be tackling our first boss. Now the Ancestor Spirit boss is a relatively easy fight. We're not going to go too in-depth into its mechanics or do play-by-plays how we do on some other bosses, because it's just that simple. The boss it's essentially a giant stag that's going to charge you. It has a couple of key attacks to look out for. It's going to have a 1-2 with its head, where it will thrust its head at you from two different directions. Quite simply, you just dodge. It has a move where it goes up in the air and it'll do little air bounces, and then it'll pause before coming down towards you. Also very easy to dodge. And then if you're standing behind it, it will try and do a back kick, which not only is that very readable, but also quite easy to dodge. So there's not a whole lot to this fight that you need to worry about in terms of deadliness, but it can be kind of difficult to kill this enemy just because it tends to run around all over the place, and it's very large, so it's hard to get a consistent good hit on it. So with that in mind, go on through the fog and you can see the Ancestor Spirit waiting. We're going to pull out Caelid for this fight and pop our flask. Like I said, not a particularly difficult fight. It's just kind of annoying to land solid hits on it. So here comes the breath. And the breath, you can just avoid this. It'll do a little bit of damage here, as you can see. But unless you're like standing inside of it, here's the one, here's the two. Occasionally he'll have a third swing on that as well, but you don't usually end up getting that from him. A much bigger fan of the 1-2 than the 1-2-3. Jumping heavy attacks tend to work pretty well. So you've seen the 2, you've seen the 3. And you can see how simplistic this boss is. Here comes the back kick. You can see a very big tell on that. Tried to go through and gore me. Anytime he's doing this, that's a really open window, so if you need to get off a heal, those are probably the best times to do so. He hasn't even done his jump. Usually he'll jump up in the air and do little prances, which we haven't seen yet. I'm hoping to force him to do that before we kill him. You can see jumping right through and completely missing. This is part of the difficulty of this fight, is sometimes you just can't hit him. He's got these old skinny decrepit legs, and you're just... There we go. That was a big hit. Trying to get him to go up into the air just to show the pause on that maneuver, but he's being quite stubborn with it. We'll back up. Usually if we back up, he may go for it. Let's try and run away and see if we can trigger it, just so you can see the very last move to potentially be concerned about in this fight. But he'll go up in the air and he'll do a series of kind of air prances, which will end as he comes down and attacks you. I briefly just want to show the dodge timing for that. It's roughly identical to everything else he's done. You just need to roll through it. But it is odd that he's very stubbornly not doing it for me. That's okay. I mean, I think we gave him enough courtesy. But taking him out, we'll pick up the Ancestral Follower Ashes and net you a cool 13,000. From here, we're going to warp on over to the Worshipper's Woods. We're going to spend all of those runes, and then we're going to make our way on over to the next boss. Okay, our last point in endurance. Beautiful. And as you can see right there, even though he didn't do the aerial, it's fairly easy to see. Very similar to his kind of horn thrust cadence. I'll do like bounce, 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 and then I'll hang in the air for a second. While he's hanging in the air is when you want to go ahead and hit him. And this is actually like a baby version of that. There's a much stronger version that we're going to encounter later on in the game. And that one, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about the mechanics. But as you saw there, that didn't really take too much effort to take that enemy out. But we just took our warp that was right on over here. Right here, excuse me. A good way to tell is if you look at this icon, you can see the down pillar and then the platform right here. So that's what we took. And this has brought us to an upper area. So you can see looking down, we can see a bunch of different stuff. There's some of the obelisks that we have already lit. There's a couple of loose items up here, but the big reason for coming up here is there is another Dragonkin Warrior. On top of that, we also have another spell for our sorcerers out there, and then on top of that, there is the Marika Sword Seal, or excuse me, the Scar Seal, which is it's similar to the Radigan Scar Seal, but it's intended for casters. So we'll go ahead and grab that and talk about it in just a minute. But for now, just run on past all the claiming, and we'll get this thing. You can see that bubble. That's what we're about to get. Now have Great Ocular Bubble, so if you want to be a bubble mage, you now have both Great Ocular and the normal bubbles. I'm gonna run on over, grab this, and then we have some Dragon Wound Grease that's tucked away in the back, which isn't necessary, but it's helpful to fight dragons. And this boss that we're about to fight, he's actually a completely optional boss. You don't need to kill him, but we're already down here, and he does guard the Scar Seal, so it's kind of like, nah, we might as well, you know. It's not like we're really going out of our way to fight this thing. Okay, don't think the horse is going to fit there. Which, speaking of the horse, little fun theory fact, I don't believe this has been confirmed, but if you look at the way he prances in the sky, it's believable that Torrent is actually a very, very young version of the Ancestor Spirit that we just fought. Almost a baby or a juvenile. There's the little air prances, the fact that it has the horns. A couple other stray loots that we can grab that are down here. A lot of environment-based collectibles. Dukist, Urva, the Formic Rock, you know, stuff that's very useful for crafting is in this area. The Golden Ring 7. Like I said, while none of this stuff is a necessity, it is good to grab it all up. Alright, so next up we have the Warrior. Now, this Dragonkin is going to be slightly different from the first one. It does not have a phase change, so it won't actually sprout the wings and go to the Frozen Lightning. That isn't something that you're going to see here. However, it does have more health, and it's a little bit bigger. So this the strategy here is really going to be to just kind of stay on its heels and keep trying to hit the heels. I would recommend using an Ashen Summon here, just to have one that gets up on top of it and has it distracted. As you can see, you can also fight this mounted on Torrent if you want, but I find myself getting much better damage in when I'm on the ground doing those charged heavies. Let's see, very big. So this is definitely a fight I would recommend you not fighting locked on for. Get a stagger, get on over to the head. It's very unlikely that your Ashen Summon is going to survive this fight, by the way. So just expect to have to close it on out without the Ashen Summon. So the best thing to do is to just get in as much damage as you can while the summon is alive and serving as a partial distraction. charged a little early on that one. If I can get behind it, I can probably just kill it here. There we go. Torrent bringing the experience up. And it'll take some practice fighting larger enemies like this because they can be very, very difficult, just in terms of trying to get clean hits on. But a little bit of practice and you'll get there. So after that, just run on over here. This talisman is not considered the legendary one. There's the Scar Seal and the Soar Seal, but this functions very similar to the Radigans. So as you can see, it is going to decrease my defense, but I'm gaining 3 points into Mind, Intelligence, Faith, and Arcane, making it very useful for casters, especially if you're trying to diversify and use spells that pull from multiple areas. Now briefly, let's talk about the weapon we just got, the Dragon Halberd, because it looks pretty basic, you know, 2210 spinning slash. You only see physical damage on it. Doesn't seem like all that much, but the spinning slash on this is unique in that it's going to actually imbue this weapon with frozen lightning. So you can see we have a little lightning AoE, and now we have frozen lightning on the weapon. So just want to point this one out because it does look rather vanilla on the surface, and it actually has quite a bit of flair once you actually try it on out. So not a bad weapon if you are a fan of the pokes and like the idea of frozen lightning. You can see we have a bonus 160 lightning damage while it is currently buffed, and on top of that we can actually inflict frostbite with it as well. So from here, we're going to warp on over to the Deep Sulfur Well. As a reminder, you just tap R3 on your controller to swap between the upper and lower versions of the map. Now, this next part is mainly just for demonstrative purposes. We are not going to be able to do this right now. Full disclosure, we are going to die in just a second here. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to spend our stats. 5,000 is actually kind of a lot to lose. Let me see if I can't pop some runes and get that closer to 0. So after spending a bunch of our runes, we have managed to get down to where we have less than 1,000 held, which is ideally what we want. Go ahead and we're just going to run right along. This path is actually, it's a ravine, so you can't actually go anywhere. There's some stuff back there you can look at, and a rune bear if you want to be friends with him. I would avoid it, but we're going to go ahead and just run on over this way. Now if you want, you can go ahead and kill these giants right now. I won't be killing them right now simply because I don't think we're actually going to be able to beat the counter up ahead. But typically, when you're actually running on over here and doing the attempts of the challenge we're about to show you, it's worthwhile to at least kill this giant because his arrows can actually reach you while you're in combat. So, oh man. Not expect to get hit from behind with the arrow. Real fast just to show how we kill these. I've covered this in the past. But these giants all have very weak critical spots on their chest, so if you do 2 charged heavies, sometimes it takes more. Because I'm not two-handing my weapon. There we go. And once you knock them down, you can just run on over and hit the crit spot in the chest, and you'll do a massive critical attack. As you can see, almost 5,000 damage there. You're not actually capable of doing that in normal circumstances. These enemies just happen to be incredibly weak to that. Which, as you can see, 2,700 runes kind of makes it silly now thinking about how I was spending so much. But we're gonna do a couple things. One, we're gonna run right past this big gentleman for the time being. We're gonna run in here. And this is going to unlock you another one of the PvP Colosseums. So we already went by the one that's over in Limgrave. This one is particularly cool because fighting here has the same rule set as Limgrave, the 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. But it will also allow you to pull your Ashen Summon into the fight. So you and your friends can jump into a battle against each other with your Ashen Summons, which is pretty cool. Now go ahead and talk to the Great Jar, and you'll see a little ellipsis, and then you can now see the Knight of the Great Jar's red summon signs. Now we're offline, so being offline there are presets that we could go up against. This one is the parry-centric one, that one's the mage with the rapier, and then this one is the hammer guy. If you're playing online, you will be going against the players who most recently cleared this. Now, if you manage to defeat all 3 of these signs without dying, you'll get a very good talisman. It increases your total weight capacity, so it's going to allow you to run much heavier gear. This is a talisman that's used on a pretty large amount of endgame builds. Pretty much any build that's going to be using heavier armor or heavier weapons is more than likely going to be running this talisman. So this is 100% worth doing. It's very difficult to do at this point. We're only 60. I think you should be roughly around 90 to 100 before you attempt this challenge. But just to give you an idea on how hard these enemies hit and how much health they have, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate on one of them, which will most likely result in my death, but you'll at least have an idea. Remember when the game first came out, I didn't realize how strong these were supposed to be. And so I ended up trying to blast them off the cliff with force, which took quite a while. So you can see they're doing, 3 hits, and I am down to about 1/3 of my health. Whereas you can see my sword swings are doing next to nothing from these duelists. Even with the golf swing, like I could. If I was very careful, I may be able to kill the one, but the fact that there are, there's 2 more I would have to kill after that. As I said, very difficult for the time being, but I wanted to point it out because the only way to get up here is from the Siofra River well, and it does give you access to one of the better talismans in the game. But with that knocked out, instead, we're going to go over here to Summon Water Village Outskirts. Now, if you don't have this, of course, Saints Bridge, or Warmaster Shack, or Stormhill Shack, which you definitely have Stormhill Shack. But we're going to be making our way on over and reaching our very first grace in Lower Caelid, which is what we're going to be tackling in the next episode. So we are just literally going to be following the road. Pretty simple, kind of hard to get lost, but there is some stuff along the way. So as we go through here, there's a Mariner. If you want to fight him, you certainly can. At this point in the game, this enemy should be an absolute blowout. Where'd you run off to? Just to show how heavy we're hitting him. As you can see, we can probably just stand here and whack him a couple times and get some rings out of him. Now, this is an enemy that typically you would have found in your adventures around Limgrave, so we're certainly killing it pretty late, but he does have one of the death roots, which you do need to collect all of those if you're trying to do the Bestial Sanctum quest. And he's got the militiamen. I actually like the militiamen as a summon. As long as enemies don't stay on top of them, it will continually resurrect. So depending on the enemy AI, they actually have the potential to be quite powerful as a distraction tool. But just stay along this road. There's going to be a church up ahead. There is also going to be an invasion event. Now, at this point in the game, you should be able to handle this invasion pretty easily, I think. But if you're particularly worried about it, you can actually approach all the way from the side, and you can avoid it, which I think is worthwhile doing early on. But at this point, no. Anastasia the Tarnished Eater is not long for this world. Do the Sacred Scorpion Charm, nice for those holy builds. Here we get the Nomadic Warriors Cookbook and the Missionaries Cookbook. And then we'll go ahead and touch this grace just to have access to it. And we're not actually going to be staying here. As I mentioned, we're going to be making our way on over to the starting point of our Caelid adventures. So just stay along this path. You can see a fiery wall. Go ahead and hop that. And now we are in Caelid. This is the grace where everything is going to start from. Now, while I typically end episodes and tell you to get on out there and explore, Caelid is a little bit different. Caelid is, I would argue, the area where players are most likely to die their first time going through it. Now, one of the reasons for that is Caelid has a lot of things that will kill you. On top of the fact that there's tons of rot, there are rather large enemies like this giant crow. And while the dungeons themselves aren't bad, between the giant crow and the giant dogs, there are a lot of very large enemies that can kill you very quickly. So if you want to go ahead and explore Caelid, you're certainly welcome to. If you want to wait, in the next episode, we're going to be working on how I would go about tackling this whole lower area. Briefly, before we do end, I want to point out that up here, basically everything north of this is considered northern Caelid, and that is much, much higher in difficulty. You can go there now as well, but I would not recommend that at all. So either way, we are wrapping things up, and in the next part, we'll be taking you through Caelid.